We're going to try Marvin Schneider. Marvin Schneider. I wrote an article in the New York Times about him. Maybe it was a week or two ago. I have to check my watch on that one because Marvin he's the New York City. He's the Clockmaster of New York. It's an actual title, and he works for the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, also known as DCAS. They run a bunch of buildings in New York, city-owned buildings, and they do a number of other things. And Marvin works for them. He was a municipal employee when, I guess in the 80s, and he started wondering why a lot of these clocks during the fiscal crisis of the 70s especially were left ravaged and inoperable. And he began taking upon himself to start fixing some of the clocks on high above, in the city skyline. And eventually Mayor David Dinkins conferred upon him the title of City Clockmaster, and that became the principal part of his job, was to fix the city's clocks, make sure they keep running. I mean, some of them are, powered by electricity, and some of them are powered by weights and such. And Marvin's going to tell us a little more about clocks. Marvin, thanks for getting on the line with us this morning.
Oh, fine. Yes.
Yeah. So I was talking to listeners about that you hold the title of City's Clockmaster, which is probably there hasn't been a New York City Clockmaster in a century, if ever, right?
Well, in the 19th century, the closest thing was called a regulator of public clocks, and that was a city employee. Later on, in the early 20th century, what they did was they hired somebody as a contractor. In other words, a private watch or clock repair company, and they would have a contract for service. That's basically how they did it. And there were two individuals that had this contract for a long time, one over 30 years, one over 20 years, but they were not city employees. What makes my position different is that I'm on the city payroll.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about clocks, clock tower type of clocks. I mean, you would think in this age when everyone has a clock on forget wristwatches. Everyone is walking around with a phone, staring at their phones, and they all have clocks on them, and it's digital clocks and that type of thing. Are these clocks still relevant? Do people still use them? Are they still operable? And just talk about the clocks in general.
Look, certainly. I mean, first of all, it's part of the history of timekeeping, and history is a dynamic thing. It doesn't stand still. It keeps going forward, and that's why you ask this question about maybe they're not relevant anymore, because you have these devices where you have the time. The time is displayed. Now, that's all good and well, but sometimes these things are not accessible. You may be walking out in the rain or in a storm or whatever it is, or you are otherwise occupied, and if you see a public clock, then you instantly connect, and you don't have to risk being run down by carrying your device. So it's still relevant. And there are also people, hard to believe, but either do not have these devices or don't always carry them. And so the public clocks do come in handy. When you need them, you realize that they are, that they provide a function for you. Right. Most of the time, as you intimate, we take them for granted.
Yeah.
But there are uses, and it's part of history, and the very fact that some of these old clocks still keep time well enough to be relied upon in our society of today, that speaks volumes about the craftsmanship that went into these, and a lot of them are made in America.
Right.
We were once, the United States once was copied by other countries, like Switzerland. You think Switzerland it's a big deal. You got a Swiss watch. Rolex advertises this is a Swiss watch, and Movado, all these other companies. There was a time in the later part of the 19th century where the Swiss were making American copies, fakes. Waltham and Howard, and they were
knocking off
producing
American,
cheap fakes. Knockoffs.
Right.
So that those public clocks and those old survivors have, they have a special place in our history, and they shouldn't be forgotten.
I mean, we're talking about clocks, church tower clocks. The one that you and I went up to, the one on atop City Hall. There's one in Herald Square, a very special one in Herald Square, and these are very old mechanisms behind these clocks and the clock faces. I mean, at least a century old, right? I mean, and it's kind of wondrous that they still keep time. I mean, sometimes up to a few seconds a month or something, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, gears and rods and levers and that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's right, and they are the original weight-driven clocks are energy efficient. Would make a big deal about energy efficiency today.
Yeah, they're green, right?
So they're very green.
Yeah,
they don't generate anything except the time.
What's the oldest clock in New York, Marvin?
I can't tell you because I haven't seen them all. But there is a very old tower clock on St. Teresa's Roman Catholic Church on Rutger Street on the Lower East Side.
Yeah,
I think that is dates from the 1830s.
And
it's still working?
Is that is that four faces, or does it face out on the building, or where is it? Where is it located on the building?
It's a four-faced clock.
Yeah,
and you can see it when you come across. You can most prominently see it when you come across from Brooklyn towards Manhattan on the right side. You can catch a glimpse of it.
And what about I guess this is, getting out of New York, but have you ever visited Big Ben in London?
No, I didn't make it to Big Ben yet. I never made it to London.
Yeah.
But I did get to the town square of the old town of Prague in the Czech Republic.
Yes.
That is a very famous clock. It's an astronomical type of clock, and it has figures coming out at certain times of the day. And tremendously complex.
Yeah.
And I think last year there was an article in the New York Times about this clock that there's a local clockmaker and machinist, and he comes with his car. He was doing a major restoration because some of the gears wore out. So he would take the clock apart and put it in his trunk and take it home and come back the next week with everything repaired and ready to go for another 100 years.
Now, where do you get the spare parts for these very old clocks now?
Well, they're getting very difficult to find. So sometimes you can find clocks that have been wrecked and they've been cannibalized, and there might be something available from that source where you may have a decommissioned clock and tower, and rather than putting it on the junk heap, the owner might part with the thing for its components. But otherwise,
you have to make the parts.
You have to make them. You have to have a machine shop.
Right. And what about the coordinating bells, music, and the timing of the clock? How do you manage that?
Well, the strike mechanism is usually internally geared so that they work together. In other words, when you reach the half hour, quarter hour, whatever it is, whatever type of clock it is. Reach that point, then there's an interplay of gears, and they go off at that particular time. If they don't, then there's a problem. but it's all built in. Yeah. It's one large system which integrates two functions. The one function is the time telling, and the other is the strike.
Yeah.
Now, that is the case in most places. We have an exception at Herald Square because the machinery was moved from the old Herald building, put in storage for 20 years, and then made part of the James Gordon Bennett Monument, which is in Herald Square, with the two figures, Stuff and Guff, striking the bell. And for many years, it was run in its original way, that is, weight-driven. And the time and the strike were linked. Now, what happened in the 1950s, 1950s was a time where a lot of the old mechanisms were frowned upon. They were seen as something to be gotten rid of. So they didn't want to be bothered with weight-driven clocks because they had to be wound once a week, and they had their problems. They required a high degree of maintenance. So what they decided to do in many cases was to electrify the function of the weights. And so instead of having a clock being driven by gravity, a small electric motor was put in, and it ran continuously. Now, in the case of the Herald Square, for whatever design reasons they had over there, the strike and the time are in two separate areas and are independent of each other. So if you get the clock striking, let's say, at the right time, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, it has to be coordinated with another clock. So what you have, sometimes you'll have, maybe you'll have, for some reason, slippage in some gears of the clock, and you'll have a situation where it'll be off a couple of minutes.
Right. So now, the clock might be running on time, and the gong might be a little off, or vice versa. Right.
That's right.
Right.
And we have a situation right now where after we did some maintenance, set everything up, changed the time for the Eastern Standard Time from daylight saving. Once we left, it was okay. Now the clock strikes to the passerby. He stands there 6 minutes of the hour. So it means that either there's a problem with one motor running fast or the other one running slow, or slippage in some drive shafts or gears. So what we've done is we verified that it's consistent. In other words, it's not changing, it's not getting worse. So every hour, 6 minutes before the hour, it strikes. So the way to remedy that is since it appears that the strike is early, it's fast, so what we have to do is to stop it, to cut the power to that component for 6 minutes, so that the next time everything will be coordinated. That's
Right.
that's what you have to do.
All right. Well, listen, it's not even right twice a day the way it is now, right? I mean, if you stop
That's
it.
right.
But you mean to tell me that the one I'm going to watch this Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade tomorrow, and the clock right next to the start of the parade. I mean, this parade is going to go off late because of this thing, right?
Well, Macy's. Well, the only thing it won't affect it because the clock dials will right now have the right time. Both Macy's and the Herald Square James Gordon Bennett Monument, they both have the right time. The only thing that has been off is that it was ringing 5 minutes to or 6 minutes to the hour.
Yeah.
So it will be. It's in the process of being changed. All it requires is an investment of 6 minutes,
Right.
And that's going to happen today.
You know, if you're a commuter running to Penn Station there, or you're late to your office job right in that area in Herald Square, you might get a little nervous. Like you have 5 minutes to get to work or the train, and the gong is going off, right? I mean.
And is that he said he was the one that said "Go west, young man"? Was it?
Oh, Horace Greeley.
Oh no, that was
Horace
Horace Greeley.
Oh right, but is he also Herald?
No, he was the Tribune.
Oh yes,
Come on, Malik.
I know. Well, I'm learning. I'm a foreigner, you know. I'm just now. When you're Marvin, when you
James Gordon Bennett Jr. was a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he loved. He was an international kind of person, and he went to France to get the figures, the stuff and guff, the Minerva and the bell ringers.
Yeah.
He had that all made in Paris. It was all brought over to the United States.
Now, when you're your own physical situation, climbing these places, are you in danger many times of taking a bad fall?
You should see where he goes.
Yeah.
He climbs up these ladders and these little byways, and he's going up on the top of buildings. Yeah. How old are you, Marvin, now?
Oh, I'm 79.
79.
Good
He's
God.
spry, though. He's, yeah.
But I have a good assistant who is a spring chicken, and he's 69.
Oh, good. Yeah, you got to keep the youth around.
So I sent when I'm not quite up to it, I send him up.
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
So you're still.
And what's his
climbing,
name?
though?
What's his name?
His name is Forrest Markowitz.
Right. He's your right-hand man. Right.
Yes, he is.
Or minute hand man. I don't know what do you call it. You know?
Yeah. Is he always on time?
Is more.
Well, generally he's pretty close to it. Yeah,
Right.
Fashionably so.
Oh, good enough.
You know what I like when you told me that like listening to a clock beat is like if you've really been around them a long time is like like a good heart surgeon listening to a heartbeat. Like you can actually hear if it's off or something wrong with it or the rhythm of it, right?
Yes, Forrest was telling me yesterday he had a watch, and this watch was behaving very oddly, and he listened to it, and every third second there was like a clunk.
Yeah. It's got a murmur. Yeah.
It was so he had to he figured out that it had to be from a certain wheel because that wheel has so many teeth. And when he looked at that wheel, he saw that there was an irregularity. So something was bent, very slightly. So he took a tweezers and he bent it back, and the thing was perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, Marvin, we're coming to the final tick of this interview, and I appreciate you coming on. It was amazing.
I thought we're just starting. You mean we're at the end already?
Yeah, it's amazing. Time flies, right?
Time flies.
Yeah. But now we'll have you back on again, and just going out with you and seeing some of these big clocks on high in New York City is incredible in how they work, and so I hope you keep doing this.
It's a very interesting view of the city when you go into these places.
Yeah, it is. Okay, Marvin Schneider, the New York City Clockmaster. Thanks for talking to us today.
Okay, it was my pleasure.